Empire.
Welcome to Inside the Cap. I'm your host, Joel Corey. You can find me on Twitter at Corey Joel, CorryJoel, and also read my regular CBSSports.com column, Agent's Take, on NFL contracts and salary cap matters. This week we're going to continue the look at players to watch in a contract year and turn our attention to defensive players. First up will be edge rushers. Von Miller missed the 2020 season because of an ankle injury. During the offseason, the Broncos tried to get the Super Bowl 50 MVP to take a pay cut. He's making $18 million this year. Total compensation. That was before having to pick up an option for his 2021 contract year. He refused, and they decided to carry him on for the season and not release him. And Von Miller's decision so far has been validated. He was named AFC Defensive Player of the Month for September. Miller had 4 sacks and a league-high 6 tackles for loss, as the Broncos are off to their first 3-0 start since 2016. He's the only AFC player to record a sack in each of the first 3 weeks of the season. Problem is he going to be in Denver next year? I suspect that Von Miller, if he doesn't do some sort of extension before free agency starts next March, he's hitting the open market. Franchise tag for him is going to be $26.45 million. The 120% salary increase provisions will kick in for him. It's going to be based off of his cap number. That's essentially what salary means for franchise tag purposes. It'll be the first time that he'll be an unrestricted free agent. If Teddy Bridgewater keeps playing well, he would be a franchise tag candidate much more than Von Miller, because finding a quarterback that is competent is a harder commodity than a pass rusher. Then is Denver going to want to pay someone who's now 32 years old on a go-forward basis for years 33, 34, potentially 35? That would remain to be seen. But they also have Bradley Chubb, who's going to be in his 5th-year option for 2022, their first-round pick from 2018, who is out probably a good 8 weeks after having ankle surgery in September, the latter part of September. He's a Pro Bowler last year, is playing on a $12.714 million 5th-year option. Then there's the whole thing, how much do you pay a pass rusher who's going to be heading to his mid-30s? Because typically pass rushers don't really age all that well. So, yeah, J.J. Watt this year signed a deal when he asked for his release from Houston for essentially $28 million over 2 years, for incentives to take it up, and escalators to take it up $30 million over 2 years. Von Miller's current contract, he's playing it out, made him the highest paid defensive player when he was franchised in 2016. Signed for $114.5 million over 6 years. That averages slightly under $19.1 million per year. He's not going to think that he needs to take a pay cut, particularly if this first month where he was defensive player of the month is any indication how he plays the whole year. Then Von Miller's going to be in first-team All-Pro consideration, and he's going to justifiably go, you know what? I'm the same guy I've always been. Same guy that's most likely going to be in the Hall of Fame. And we'll see what he could probably get on the open market, because he might price himself out of Denver. Let's turn ourselves to another pass rusher in Chandler Jones. Chandler Jones requested a trade during the offseason. I suspect that part of that was he was tired of seeing the Cardinals pay outsiders, guys who hadn't played one down for the team, get paid. And by that I mean DeAndre Hopkins. They trade for him in March 2020, Give him a 2-year contract extension, averaging $27.25 million per year, which made him the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. And then they signed J.J. Watt to a contract for worth up to $30 million after he got released from the Texans. So he's like, hey, I've been here. I've been productive. Shouldn't you guys take care of me? Since he was given a franchise tag in February 2017, the only thing that Chandler Jones has done is be second in sacks in the NFL to Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald has 59.5. Chandler Jones has 55. And he did it in 11 fewer games than Aaron Donald, who is most definitely the best defensive player in the NFL. So what does Chandler Jones go out and do in the season opener against the Titans? To me, it looked like he was taking all his frustrations out on everything against left tackle Taylor Lewan and quarterback Ryan Tannehill. Was named NFC Defensive Player of the Week for 5 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, and 2 forced fumbles. Hadn't had a sack since then, but showed that he hadn't had any diminishment in skill, and you shouldn't, from a torn bicep. That's which cost him the final 11 games last year. Then after that game, General Manager Steve Keim came out and said that they're not in the business of moving on or getting rid of good football players. It was subsequently revealed that through CBS Sports NFL insider Jason Lockenfor that he received a 1-year offer at $14 million base salary in 2022 to extend the contract and $1.5 million of incentives for 15 sacks. I don't know if there's a signing bonus in that, but probably a fundamental disagreement in value. There are 10 pass rushers with contracts average over $20 million per year. Jones is going to be 32 next year. Probably isn't thinking that I'm slowing down. I should probably be in that $20 million per year pass rusher grouping is what he's thinking. But age also factors in the equation with him. Year younger than Von Miller, but the same kind of considerations. Franchise tag for him is going to be $25 million, so he could be leaving the desert. Another interesting pass rusher, or a guy who also plays linebacker, or at least he's listed as a linebacker, is Hassan Reddick. Last year in Arizona, they quit trying to make him a linebacker after Chandler Jones went down, made him a pass rusher, tied for 4th NFL, 12.5 sacks. Now, that didn't translate into a lucrative contract in free agency. Trey Hendrickson got like $13.5 million per year for being a one-hit wonder. Hadn't done anything his first 3 years. Then nobody had him leading the league in sacks. So he goes to the Jets for $13.5 million per year. Hassan Reddick goes to the Carolina Panthers. Gets reunited with his college coach, Matt Rule. 1-year deal, $6 million. Up to $8 million through incentives. He's off to a great start. 4.5 sacks in 3 games. Very consistent. First game, 1.5 sacks. Second game, 1.5 sacks. Third game, 1.5 sacks. So he's not going to keep up a pace of having 1.5 sacks per game, but that's off to a very nice start. Now, that being said, Carolina doesn't necessarily have to pay a quarterback next year. They have Sam Darnold on the 5th-year option, but he's looking pretty good, so they're probably going to want to do an extension with him. He's the prime candidate to get a franchise tag, Hassan Reddick. And this would the linebacker franchise tag projects to $9.024 million percentage of the cap next year. And if the cap is at the $208.2 million salary cap ceiling, that would put him at $17.88 million. If Reddick can keep this up, he's going to have ammunition to be in that $20 million per year pass rusher club. Another pass rusher to keep an eye on is Jadeveon Clowney. Last year, everything went about as poorly as it could for Clowney. Played 8 sackless games for the Tennessee Titans before he had season-ending meniscus surgery to repair a meniscus that he tore in his left knee. Goes to Cleveland on a 1-year deal for $8 million, worth up to $10 million for incentives. Clowney's been trying to get a big long-term contract ever since he was given a franchise tag, or actually in a 5th-year option, I should say, with the Houston Texans. Then was franchised. After that, traded to the Seahawks for the 2019 season. And 2020 free agency, when he was playing under the franchise tag in Seattle, flashes potential that he could be great as the former number one pick, but has also been injury prone. Was looking reportedly asked for over $20 million per year. Couldn't find any takers in that. That's how I ended up in Tennessee for a one-year deal for $13 million. Now, he's got 2 sacks this year. They came last week against the Chicago Bears, and their offensive line is in disarray. But he's not going to see double teams. You wouldn't think that much because All-Pro Myles Garrett is on the other side. So the key to Clowney getting that big payday that has eluded him so far is probably going to be staying healthy and having double-digit sacks. He's never had double-digit sacks in his career. So if David Clowney can get to double-digit sacks, that may change his long-term fortunes, or maybe he's, after what he's gone through past couple of years, having to play on one-year deals, has lowered his asking price on a long-term deal. Nobody's going to pay him on a long-term deal anything that he would have signed last year. So we'll see if the expectations are lessened compared to 2020 free agency when he's in 2022 free agency, because I think he's just a one-year rental in Cleveland unless he's going to play for what would be perceived as a hometown discount compared to his previous expectations in free agency. One more edge rusher to look at is Jason Pierre-Paul. He's going to be 33 in January. I suspect he's on the Ndamukong Suh plan now, which is I've made money. I'm happy I want to be in a winning situation. I'll sign short term, 1-2 years, and make pretty decent money. I'm good. The last deal he signed was $25 million over 2 years, with another $1 million per year in incentives. So maybe to stay put, Tampa's in win now mode. That's something that could get it done for him, not to have to go someplace else next year. Let's turn our attention to the interior of the defensive line. Not quite the type of names on the interior. You've got Akeem Hicks, which is kind of interesting from the standpoint that he was allowed to shop himself for a trade, he and his agent Drew Rosenhaus, during the offseason. Nothing came to fruition of that, so he reversed course and now wanted a contract extension. Couldn't get anything done. Now says he wants to finish his career in Chicago. He's 31 years old. Biggest issue with that is everyone in the decision-making capacity has a tenuous situation. GM Ryan Pace should be on the hot seat. Head coach Matt Nagy is on the hot seat. If there's a regime change, you don't know what the new GM, new coach wants. Neither one of them would be vested in Akeem Hicks. He may not be a fit scheme-wise, age-wise. They're probably going to go in a rebuilding process with Justin Fields as quarterback for the future. So a guy like Akeem Hicks, I should say, may be playing his last days in Chicago this year, notwithstanding what he said before the season started about wanting to finish his career there. Another interesting interior defensive lineman is Jarran Reed, who's in Kansas City now. The Seahawks really wanted to keep him this year. He was in the second year of a 2-year extension, averaging $11.5 million per year. Was supposed to make right around $8 million this season. They wanted to play salary cap gymnastics with him, so they could take his $8 million, basically pay him the same thing he was supposed to make this year, turn it a majority of the signing bonus, and then add voting dummy years to lower the cap hit. He balked at that. Got cut and lost money in the process. Signed a 1-year deal for $5.5 million in Kansas City. Maxes out at 7 through incentives. Kansas City defense has been terrible this year. He has no sacks, and he's only had one truly productive year. In 2018, had 10.5 sacks. Most sacks since then was last year in 2020, had 6.5. But that Kansas City defense, second worst rushing defense in the NFL, giving up 160.3 yards per game. Tied for a league worst 31.7 points per game given up. Have 4 sacks in 3 games as a team. That's tied for 30th in the NFL. So nobody on the defense is getting anything done, and Jarran Reed is a part of that. So he's going to have, if all he could get last year, or I should say this year, was, or what he was willing to play for was 5.5 on a 1, he's not doing anything to change those fortunes where there should be a lot of demand for him in free agency. So still early. We're not even a quarter of the way through the season, but not a good start to a contract year for Jarran Reed. Let's turn our attention to linebackers, and by that I mean off-ball linebackers. And the two which are probably the most intriguing are Leighton, Vander, Esch of the Cowboys and Anthony Barr of the Vikings. Cowboys passed on Vander Esch's 5th-year option for $9.145 million after drafting Micah Parsons with the 12th overall pick. Problem with Vander Esch has been durability, and those concerns date back to his days at Boise State. Played great as a rookie and can't stay healthy, kind of like Sean Lee, who was a talented linebacker the Cowboys had who just retired this year, but is never constantly available. There's a log jam at linebacker now with Dan Quinn coming over to be defensive coordinator, the former Falcons head coach. One, you have Parsons. You have Jalen Smith. He brought over Keanu Neal, who was a safety that was converting to linebacker, and the season opener against the Buccaneers, they were kind of platooning them. Parsons and Neal, and then Smith and Vander Esch would come in, but that's kind of resolved itself. DeMarcus Lawrence gets hurt, so they're basically turning Parsons for the time being into a defensive end. Neal's on the COVID list, so Vander Esch's play time has gone up steadily each week, which is going to bode well for him trying to attract interest in free agency, because he played 22% the first week, 52% the second week, and 76% the third week. So one, he's got to stay healthy. And two, we'll see how the playtime shakes out once Dallas has a full complement of defensive players back. Jalen Smith probably won't be there next year. He hasn't lived up to the contract he signed as a couple of years ago, where he gave up unrestricted years valued at $12.8 million per year. So he'll probably be out of the mix. But if you didn't want Vander Esch at a fully guaranteed $9.145 million option, how much are you going to pay him on a go-forward basis? If I'm Vander Esch and you get rid of Smith, I'm like, hey, you're willing to pay an off-ball linebacker $12.8 for the UFA years, so that's what I want. So I see Vander Esch probably playing elsewhere next year unless Dallas look like they should win the NFC East. Does win NFC East, and they're a serious contender to get out of the NFC and go to the Super Bowl, then maybe Jerry's going to be inclined to think he's that close to finally get an elusive another Super Bowl win and be willing to make the investment. Now, Anthony Barr is going to turn 30 in March. He only played 2 games in 2020 because of a pec injury, has yet to play this year because of a knee injury. In 2019, he was essentially a New York Jet when he was a free agent. Had agreed to a 5-year, $75 million contract, had a change of heart before put ink to paper, goes back to the Vikings, $67.5 million over 5 years, up to $75 million in incentives based on sacks. And that was top of the market money for off-ball linebackers then. Took a pay cut this year from $12.9 million to $10 million. He said he didn't want his last memories as a Viking to be the injury-plagued season. And in the process, they made the 2022 and 2023 years voiding. So he'll be free after the year because last day of the 2021 league year, those contract years void. But he's going to have to revert back to the old Pro Bowl for him to come anywhere close to getting the contract that he's currently playing under as a Viking, the one he originally signed, not the one to reduce salary. Let's go to cornerback. And New England's got an interesting situation. Stephon Gilmore, the 2019 Defensive Player of the Year, had outperformed his contract. So that's why they'd agreed to advance salary last year out of his contract, which reduced his total compensation from 2021 supposed to be $12 million to just over $7.9 million. He's on PUP because of the torn quad he had last year, partially torn quad, which required offseason surgery. He wanted a new contract, didn't show up for minicamp. He's 31 right now, so part of the problem is there's something that I call the Patriot Way, which differs from what the general public calls the Patriot Way, which under Bill Belichick, it's been better to get rid of a player a year too early as opposed to a year too late, whether it's because of salary, performance, or age. And Gilmore is probably going to have to come back and show that he's the Stephon Gilmore that we've seen, the one who got the $65 million 5-year contract to go to New England. But cornerbacks, as they age, if they have any size, you know what happens to them? They're like Charles Woodson and Rod Woodson, Kareem Jackson. They become safeties. So you don't see a lot of cornerbacks, 32, 33, 34 years old, playing at an extremely high level. I know Champ Bailey was one who did in those years. Charles Woodson made the transition later than most. He was approaching his mid-30s. But that's defying the odds. So one, Gilmore is going to have to come back and play well. And two, someone's going to have to be comfortable with the history of aging corners for him to get a huge payday, which I don't think will be in New England. They've had no inclination to trade him. And what makes their situation very interesting is they have J.C. Jackson on the other side, who is playing this year on a second-round restricted free agent tender of $3.384 million. This is his opportunity to show he can be the number one corner for the at least 6 games that Gilmore is out, since Gilmore can't come off PUP until the Jets game in Week 7, October 24th game. So this is his chance to show he can hold up as a number one corner. J.C. Jackson, second NFL in interceptions last year with 9. Since the start of the 2019 season, he has the most interceptions of anyone in the league with 16. That's 4 clear of who's in second place. If he does hold up, and given there's like a 5-year age gap between Gilmore and J.C. Jackson, he's a potential franchise tag candidate for New England next year. And that franchise tag for cornerbacks, how I project it to be, would be $17.428 million at the $208.2 million cap. That it's going to take up 8.371% of the cap. But even if you don't franchise him, to me, he's got to be looking at what happened in 2020 free agency as what could be indicative of him. Byron Jones left the Cowboys to go to the Dolphins on a 5-year, $82.5 million contract, which averaged $16.5 million per year, which briefly made him the highest paid corner. He's been leapfrogged by a bunch of guys since then, including Jalen Ramsey, Marshawn Lattimore, Marlon Humphrey, Tre'Davious White. But it had a then record $54.375 million of guarantees, and $40 million was fully guaranteed at signing. So he's probably thinking, if I hit the open market, I keep doing what I did last year, I'm going to be fine. A situation like that. Now, Carlton Davis in Tampa Bay is their number one corner, and their secondary has been decimated at the cornerback position. That they went out and signed Richard Sherman off the street, and they're going to stick him in the starting lineup this week against New England. That's how banged up they are. Well, Davis has to be thinking, well, I saw Dory Jackson, Shaquille Griffin, William Jackson signed for $13 to $13.5 million per year last year. That's got to be my floor. Worst case scenario, that's what he's thinking. He's also hoping maybe Chris Godwin gets a second franchise tag. I don't get the first one. It'd be the same thing we're talking about for J.C. Jackson. So typically in free agency, teams like to raid the defending champions. So if he gets the open market, there should be some interest in him. Another guy to keep an eye on, Darius Williams, the other corner for the Los Angeles Rams. Undrafted free agent, just like J.C. Jackson in 2018. Rams gave him a first-round tender of $4.766 million. Familiarity brings comfort, and last year's Rams defensive coordinator, Brandon Staley, is the Chargers head coach. They don't have a significant investment in cornerbacks for the team across town, plays in the same stadium, SoFi. Would not surprise me if the San Diego Chargers, because of Brandon Staley being the head coach, made a huge run at Darius Williams in free agency. Let's go to safety. Great time to be a safety. Two guys were franchised, Marcus Williams, Marcus May. I always said there was no way they should do a deal before the July 15th deadline for franchise players to sign long-term. For one reason, we knew the safety market was going to jump because of what Jamal Adams was asking for. He was asking to be paid as a defensive playmaker, not a safety. He took the safety market to a new level, to $17.5 million per year. So both these guys are going to reap the benefit of that. Now, Marcus Williams conceivably could get a second franchise tag, which the 120% rule would put it at a minimum franchise tag for him be $12,734,400. And that's because all the other guys most of the other candidates they have to franchise, they've signed long-term. Ryan Ramczyk got a long-term deal, who was in his fifth-year option. Marshawn Lattimore got a long-term deal, fifth-year option. If Jameis Winston plays really well, he'll get a franchise tag, and Marcus Williams potentially get the open market. Now, Marcus May's situation in New York was kind of mind-boggling to me, because the reports came out that the Jets' first offer was like an $8.5 million per year range. It's like, that's borderline bad faith, because why would he agree to, one, a deal which is below what the franchise tag is of $10.612 million? Two, you've had like 11 safeties signed for over $11 million per year the past since 2019 free agency began. This thing got off the rails. So the Jets have a poor track record in keeping homegrown talented players. Leonard Williams, who's now making $21 million per year with the Giants, they traded him away. Jamal Adams, highest paid safety. The negotiations are going to have to take a whole different tenor for there to be any type of future for Marcus May with the Jets. And as bad as they are, why would he want to stay? Some people were talking about, well, he's an older guy. He's going to be 29 next year. That'll be held against him. I'm like, not anymore. We just saw a 32-year-old Harrison Smith become the second highest paid safety in the league at $16 million per year. So you can't legitimately try to hold age against Marcus May for a guy that's going to sign an extension for years approaching his mid-30s. He's got an ankle injury right now, and his agent tweeted, which is a curious tweet, that he should be back in time before the trading deadline. Well, I don't know if I should read something into that, but maybe his agent's like, please get me out of here. But I suspect even if he stays for the rest of the year, no trade, they're not going to franchise him again, and Marcus May is going to hit the open market. We have Tyrann Mathieu, the Kansas City Chiefs, which is another guy that patience has benefited him. When he signed to go to Kansas City in 2019, the deal tied with Landon Collins of the Washington football team to make him highest paid safety at $14 million per year. All he's done those 2 years is be a first-team All-Pro and has the most interceptions among safeties since he got there with 12. missed the first game of the year because of COVID-19, but season debut against the Ravens, had 2 interceptions, returned one for a touchdown. Chiefs general manager Brett Veach has said he's going to try to do everything to keep Matthew, who wants to stay in Kansas City, and he cited a $15 million salary cap reduction from where the cap would have been without the pandemic. But everyone else has that same issue, so that kind of falls on deaf ears to me. Since Matthew's last deal made him the highest paid safety, he's going to be thinking, I should be right up there with that Jamal Adams, $70 million over 4 years, worth of $72 million through incentives and salary escalators, and then that $16 million per year deal with Harrison Smith also means you can't hold age against him. He's got the highest cap number right now for a safety at $19,733,334. So 120% salary provisions for the franchise tag would put him at $23.63 million for a franchise tag in 2022. That's not going to happen. And if in any way, they'd probably want to give it to Orlando Brown. They gave significant draft capital to get to play left tackle. But Matthew is going to, at worst, be the second highest paid safety if you do an extension with him to stay in Kansas City long term, unless he decides, you know what, I've made money, I've signed 2 big contracts, I'm going to give him a little bit of a break, so I want to stay here. But left to his agent Tom Condon's devices, that's not going to happen. And we're going to take a look at one last safety. Jesse Bates from the Cincinnati Bengals. This guy flies under radar nationally, second-round pick in 2018. Second-team All-Pro by the Associated Press last year. He expressed some frustration during training camp when interviewed by the local media about not having a new contract, and then was like, I'm not going to address this thing anymore. Before him venting publicly, he said he wanted to be in Cincinnati long term. You don't hear a lot of players say, I want to be in Cincinnati long term. So when you got one who says that, keep him around. Bengals off to a really good start, 3-1 after beating the Jaguars on Thursday night. So Cincinnati dragging their feet is going to cost them money. Had they got that deal done before Jamal Adams, highest paid safety was Justin Simmons, who was franchised for a second time by Denver at $15.25 million per year. You ain't getting Jesse Bates for Justin Simmons money now that you have Jamal Adams and Harrison Smith done. Plus, you guys don't do traditional guarantees. Your guarantees are light. Green Bay, Steelers, Bengals, except for limited players, have a couple exceptions. Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, and now T.J. Watt in Pittsburgh. Signing bonuses are only guaranteed money. They have these third, fifth day roster bonuses in second and third year if applicable. Substitute for guarantee. So you got to deal with a more team-friendly structure and pay him, so you're going to have to accelerate the cash flow to make a deal with Jesse Bates. But in any event, you cost yourselves money by letting Jamal Adams reset the safety market. And yes, he'd be a franchise tag candidate if they can't get something long-term done. And typically when Cincinnati wants somebody to stay, for the most part, they get them to stay that's homegrown talent. But when you drag your feet and you aren't proactive with a core player who's in his prime, it becomes more costly. But anyway, that is this week's Inside the Cap. Don't forget, you can find me on Twitter at Corey Joel. That is CorryJoel. And you can read my CBSSports.com column, Agent's Take. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you back here next time. Goodbye.